Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Neuro, and I'm here to talk to you about another RTS fundamental skill. And this one is called the macro cycle. This is a game that I played on EU server a bit ago, and I had relatively good macro, so I just wanted to go through my macro cycle with you. Obviously, for each faction, the macro cycle is going to be a little bit unique, depending on what their race mechanics are. For Zerg, we have injects and creep spread and overlord placement and stuff. For Terran, they have mules or scans. For Protoss, they have chrono boost that they have to worry about spending. So for your macro cycle, what does it look like and how do you prioritize? Because an RTS game can be more on the clean side, where players aren't really attacking each other too much early on, or it can be a really dirty match where your opponent is up in your business right from the start, or you're the one who's being aggressive. And in either case, you need to know which things are the most important for your macro and which things are still important but maybe less so. And another thing is, if you ever neglect a process entirely and that stops, that's usually bad. Like if you lose your creep queens and you never remake them and your creeps stop spreading, that's a problem. So being able to make sure you know what all the elements are of your macro cycle and being able to do them all in one bundle and then move on to microing your units. So the way that I see it for Zerg macro is larva spending is a super high priority item. Larva creation is a super high priority item. Creep spread is high priority, but maybe lower than injecting a base. So for me personally, I'll usually pretty much always prefer to keep a hatchery injected rather than to not inject a hatchery and get another creep tumor. That's why you make this the third queen early, as you can see I'm doing here, and I'm not really sacrificing much in terms of inject uptime, even though I'm getting out a creep tumor here. So I'm making a small decision to get my creep tumor and then the inject in the main. But really there wasn't much downtime with the inject in the main. It was only a few seconds because I have a new queen here. So just to assess the macro, the bases are injected. Perfect, awesome. The queen energy is spent. Awesome, great. I have a base that's coming up. That's cool. And as you notice, I haven't really microed the lings around too much. I basically put them in a spot and let them do their thing. A really common mistake for RTS players, especially at a lower to medium level, is they micro their army around just kind of at home a bunch, and it doesn't really do anything for them. Or maybe their queens, they just kind of run them around, but it's not accomplishing anything. So being able to prioritize what is the highest impact move that I can make right now for my build, for me in this situation, it's to build drones, keep my bases injected, and connect them with creep. That's my number one top priority here. Priorities. Let your priority system guide your macro cycle. I want to maximize my production with the injects. If I were Protoss in this case, I would want to make sure my probe production was being chronoed, unless I wanted to pivot my chrono boost expenditure into a faster unit like an Oracle or an Adept, or into a faster upgrade like Glaives for an Adept attack or something of that nature. So I'm trying to spend my larva into drones, and I'm really just kind of bouncing between my bases with my camera keys. I'm not really messing too much with attacking my opponent. And you might be like, well, why don't you attack your opponent early? That's because I committed myself to an early third base, and it's best for me to play to my strength. I want to play to the strength of the build rather than just randomly attack my opponent. As a side note, Cyclones got reworked, so Terran is very safe in the early game from cheese anyway. So I prioritize the inject over the creep spread, but I do both. My queens are at the third, my lings are defending the natural, and because I saw the Cyclone sniping overlords, I'm going to pull my overlords back a little bit. But still, I'm mainly working on my bases and my macro. I'm focusing on droning, keeping that larva count low, trying to make sure I'm not supply blocked, and then spreading creep. So for me, it's drone, then inject, then creep. And then as an always factor, you want to not be supply blocked. So I guess you could put don't be supply blocked at the top of the list then. Step 1 in the priority, don't be supply blocked. Step 2, make sure your larva is being spent. Step 3, make sure you get more larva by keeping inject uptime. And then step 4, expand your empire by creeping. And then step 5 would be do something with your army units if you have the space to do so. And it's a good time. So I get my spores and stuff, just protecting my investment. I have queens at my third base. I saw the cyclones moving out here, and there were quite a few of them, so I'm getting ready for an attack. But they're not pressuring me just this second. Okay, now they're getting to my base. Trying to pre-split my queens here. And then I attack with my queens and my army at the same time. That was good getting the lings on the cyclones. So the hellbats had to chase them, and my queens got a lot of free damage. I am focusing on the attack for a little bit here. This is a relatively intense battle. They're committing a lot of units here. And I lost a bunch of my queens, but I still have a few. And then I immediately go back to my macro stuff. Get a hatchery to increase my production. Inject my hatcheries to increase my production. Spend my larvae into drones, because that's my game plan here, is to have big saturation and then big production. And then, only then, do I mess with my army units, if I'm playing a macro style. Even if you're playing a cheesy style, usually you want to make sure you manage your bases before you focus on micro. The analogy that I use to think about having a good macro cycle is it's like a swimmer doing the crawl stroke, where they need to take a breath before they really pull, and do their kind of arm movements and stuff. What a lot of people will do is they'll just micro their army, and then they can't make any more units because I didn't macro at all. Macroing, going to your bases and inject, is like taking a turn to breathe. You need to breathe. So as a really, really good general process, breathe before you fight. Breathe before you swim. Breathe and inject before you get all fancy with your micro. Really common thing. If you're Terran, what does that mean? That means make sure all your buildings are producing stuff, and all your army buildings are making army, all your town halls are making SCVs, and then you go in for the fight. If you're Protoss, make sure your bases are making workers if you still need more, even though you're doing an adept attack. Really, really common thing that happens for low to medium level players, even high players sometimes, is they'll basically freeze all macro whenever micro happens. So that reminder is to make sure you build units through a push. So I'm trying to redrone here. I have a pretty strong army. My opponent has a worker lead, but I have a pretty substantial army lead right now. I'm breaking rocks to set up for a fight. That's something my army can do, and then I immediately go back to injecting. I don't need to watch my army fight the rocks. That doesn't do anything for me. The result is going to be about the same. So I inject all my bases first, and once I feel like, okay, creep is being spread, the injects are going, I'm building army, now I can look at my army and do something with it. Okay, they're happy doing that. I can spread creep now. We inject everything. And you notice there, some of my bases were already injected, but I still went back and injected with all my queens. That just gives me more time that I can micro, and I won't lose the inject uptime. They did rework the inject in Legacy of the Void where you can stack it up. So now I can basically tunnel vision my army, try to get in a decent fight here, trade out some units, get those corrosive biles, and then I'm falling back when it doesn't look good anymore. And immediately the first thing that I do is inject and spend my larva. Add some tech. Make sure the army isn't dying. Fall back. Spread creep. In this game, in RTS in general, you are the commander, you are the final boss, and you want to make sure that all of your employees are doing something useful. If there's a queen at a base, she should make sure that it's injected. That is her job. If there's a hatchery, it should be producing stuff. That is its job. If you have an army, they should be either protecting you in some way or making some useful thing happen on the map. That could be breaking rocks, it could be scouting. It could be even just posturing and being up in your opponent's business. So for me to have my army here is applying pressure. Even before I attack, I'm in their sensor tower range, and they know that they have to respond to me because I have so much stuff there. So I make sure everything is cooking at home. The Evo chambers were cooking, the larva is going, and now I can focus on a fight. And then production during this fight, I have 44 lings, so even as I fight with units, I still make more units. And I have 3 separate upgrades going. Bane speed, +2 ranged and melee, and a hive is all going at the same time. And I make units through the push. And as soon as I fall back, I inject all my bases. I get my queens together. Make sure the queens are busy, make sure the army is busy and getting ready. And then now I'm using the mini-map to set up a big surround. And I want to wait and make sure I'm ready with the locusts. So now I go in and I trade with the locusts. And then during the fight, I should be making stuff. There was a little delay there, but now I'm making 34 lings. Then I'm going to run at my opponent. And as I walk across the map, I inject my bases. That's a pattern here. Every time I finish watching my army fight stuff, I immediately go back and inject. The swimmer needs to breathe. The Zerg needs to inject between their fights. And then I fall back, look away from my army, look right back at injecting. And then creeping. That base doesn't have a queen. Make a queen there. This base doesn't have a queen. I'm sending queens from my queen group to go inject it. Go harass with the swarm hosts, make sure they're cooking up. I just used the locust to click the planetary. That's great value for that locust cooldown. Now I'm going to focus on roaches and banes attacking over here. And I'm maxed right now. We can tap in the space. Mission accomplished. We can back up now. What do I do when I get back? I inject again. Oh man, all the bases are injected. I felt so good about this game. That's why I'm sharing this match in particular with you. Not all of my matches look this clean. Some of it boils down to the first fight that they took, I did okay, and they didn't really set me off balance. So I got to play this match on my terms, where I was taking the fights when I wanted to between my injects. A really aggressive player will oftentimes try to be attacking you constantly, which causes you to naturally forget stuff. But in this match, I didn't really forget any of the big stuff. My inject uptime is pretty good. I have a macro hatch, I have lots of expansions, I have a good worker count, and I was making units through the fights. So whenever you're looking through your own replays and trying to analyze how you can improve, try to look for any stoppages in your production tab. If your production tab is empty during a fight, just think about, what should I be building during this? If you have money to build stuff, you should be building units as you lose units. Doing stuff with army, falling back. What is the next thing I do? I inject as soon as I fall back with my army, as I make sure my production stuff is happening at max capacity. Getting queens to do stuff. Making sure gases are filled and whatnot. More locusts being sent to my opponent. And my opponent is running out of supply. I'm making 50 lings, 3/3, 4 creep tumors, and a gas through this push. That's fantastic. Whenever Wings of Liberty was around, like in the early ages of StarCraft, one of the things I remember casters pointing out, and they do this less now, so that pretty much all the pros are super good at macro. Back in the day, they used to be like, oh man, look at the production tab. They've got so many different upgrades going. Because it was hard to know to take all of those things and to be able to manage all of that at once. So the deeper your production tab is in terms of the number of items and the number of units, that's more macro that you're doing than your opponent. So I have 4 items right now. My opponent has 4 items as well. They're getting +2 armor, 2 tanks, 2 liberators, and 7 hellions. But I'm ahead now. I'm ahead in supply. I've killed multiple command centers. I've killed a lot of SCVs. And I'm taking all of these fights on my terms with the Stormhost Locusts, and then I'm injecting between them. So I'm not losing any of my production uptime for my fights. I'm even creeping between the fights still. And I'm alternating which side I'm attacking on. So figure out whatever your macro cycle is for your playstyle. And then also notice which types of things you tend to forget as a player. Some people, their creep just falls off if they lose a couple queens. Other people, their injects are pretty sloppy, and they just have less units to do stuff with throughout the course of the match. Other people forget to produce during a fight. So try to figure out what your main leaks are in terms of your macro cycle. And one thing that I do whenever I'm gonna play StarCraft is I'll do one warm-up match against very easy AI and just hit 200 supply. The reason I do that is because I want to work on my macro cycle unharassed, just to get in that mental rhythm of how long it takes for one queen to get enough energy to creep or inject, and then get in that routine. Before I get Hellbat all in, before there are cannons at my base, before there's proxy marine bunker, I get a clean warm-up in a custom game against very easy AI so they won't set me off balance, and I can get into that rhythm of make sure all my bases are injected, my production is being maxed out, my creep is moving forward, my larva is being spent, and then I can do stuff with my army. And as soon as you finish a fight, you look at your army and you say, okay, it's time to fall back and regroup. Immediately go back to the top of your macro cycle, which for me is making sure my larva production is maxed. Inject all those bases. Hope you found this breakdown useful. This is RTS Fundamentals Macro Cycle. Nice.